Sandra Martinez pressed her face against the small window of the transport ship and gasped. The space station looked like a giant spinning wheel made of glass and metal. Lights danced across its surface like stars, and she could see hundreds of smaller ships docking at various ports around its rim. Catwalk Prime, the pilot announced over the intercom. The fashion capital of the galaxy. We'll be docking in 10 minutes. Sandra's hands shook as she gathered her sketches and fabric samples. After 15 years of designing clothes on the outer colonies, she finally had her chance. Her universal wear collection could change everything. The clothes she had created could adapt to fit any alien species in the galaxy. No more separate designs for the tall Zentari or the four-armed Krix. Her clothes would fit everyone. The docking bay was enormous. Sandra had never seen so many different alien species in one place. Tall blue beings with crystal skin walked beside short, furry creatures that looked like walking carpets. A group of aliens that seemed to be made of living water glided past her, their forms constantly shifting and flowing. "First time on Catwalk Prime?" asked a voice behind her. Sandra turned to see a human woman about her age. She had short red hair and wore an expensive-looking silver dress that seemed to change colors as she moved. "Yes," Sandra replied. "I'm Sandra Martinez. I'm here for the Fashion Week." "I'm Kate Williams," the woman said with a smile. "I've been coming here for 5 years. Word of advice, don't let them intimidate you. Some of the aliens here think humans don't belong in high fashion." As they walked through the station's main corridor, Sandra's eyes widened. The ceiling was transparent, showing the swirling clouds of Jupiter below. Shops lined both sides of the walkway, displaying clothes that defied everything Sandra thought she knew about fashion. Dresses that looked like they were made of liquid metal, suits that seemed to be woven from pure light, shoes that floated inches above the ground. "The Grand Runway is in the center dome," Kate explained as they walked. "That's where all the major shows happen. Your show is scheduled for tomorrow night, right?" Sandra nodded. "I'm so nervous. What if they don't understand my designs? What if they think human fashion is primitive?" "Your universal wear concept is brilliant," Kate said. "I've heard rumors about it. Clothes that adapt to any species that could revolutionize the entire industry." They passed a group of the most beautiful beings Sandra had ever seen. 2 of them looked like they were carved from living crystal. Their skin sparkled with an inner light, and when they moved, rainbows danced around them. The third being seemed to flow like water, constantly changing shape and color. "Those are the Vexani twins Zara and Luna," Kate whispered. "And that's Stella, the famous Morphean model. They're the biggest names in galactic fashion. Every designer dreams of having them wear their clothes." Sandra watched the 3 supermodels glide through the crowd. Other beings stepped aside to let them pass, staring in admiration. Zara and Luna's crystal forms caught the light and threw it back in dazzling patterns. Stella shifted her appearance every few seconds, sometimes looking almost human, then changing to resemble other species. In the crowd, "They're incredible," Sandra breathed. "They're also known for being difficult," Kate said carefully. "They only work with the most established designers. They've never worn anything created by a human." Sandra felt her confidence drop. How could her simple, adaptive clothing compete with the otherworldly beauty these models could showcase? Her designs were practical, innovative, but they weren't magical or spectacular like what she saw around her. They reached Sandra's assigned workspace, a small area near the edge of the fashion district. It was much smaller than what she had expected, barely large enough for her clothing racks and sewing equipment. Through the transparent wall, she could see the Grand Runway in the distance, a massive circular stage surrounded by thousands of seats. "It's not much," Sandra said, looking around the cramped space. "Every human designer starts here," Kate assured her. "The established alien designers get the prime locations, but if your show goes well, you'll be moved to a better spot next season." Sandra began unpacking her collection. Each piece looked plain compared to the exotic fashions she had seen in the corridor. Her adaptive fabric was a dull gray color that would only show its true properties when worn. The cut was simple, designed for function rather than drama. "Tell me about your universal wear," Kate said, helping Sandra hang the clothes on racks. The fabric contains millions of tiny sensors, Sandra explained, her voice growing more confident as she talked about her work. When someone puts on the yapai garment, the sensors read their body shape, size, and even their species-specific needs. Then the fabric adjusts automatically. It can become warmer or cooler, tighter or looser, longer or shorter. It even changes texture based on what feels comfortable to that species. Kate picked up one of the shirts. It just looks like regular gray fabric. That's the point, Sandra said. It's not supposed to be flashy. It's supposed to be perfect for whoever wears it. Imagine never having to worry about whether clothes will fit. Imagine one design that works for every species in the galaxy. As Sandra worked, she noticed other designers setting up their displays. Most were aliens with exotic equipment that hummed and glowed. Their clothes seemed to defy gravity, floating in the air or constantly changing shape and color. Sandra's simple hanging racks looked pathetic in comparison. A commotion near the grand runway caught her attention. The 3 supermodels she had seen earlier were posing for photographers. Zara and Luna stood perfectly still, while their crystal skin created a light show that made the cameras flash constantly. Stella flowed from one pose to another, her body taking on impossible shapes. The fashion press loves them, Kate said, noticing Sandra's stare. They've been the faces of galactic fashion for 20 years. They can make or break a designer's career. Sandra watched as a young alien designer approached the models with some of his clothing. Stella looked at the garments for exactly 3 seconds before turning away with obvious disgust. Zara and Luna didn't even acknowledge the designer's presence. The alien's face fell and he walked away with his rejected designs. They're very selective, Kate said quietly. Sandra felt a chill run down her spine. Tomorrow night, she would present her life's work to an audience that included those 3 supermodels and hundreds of influential alien fashion critics. Her simple, practical designs would be judged against the most spectacular creations in the galaxy. But as she looked at her universal wear collection, Sandra reminded herself why she had created it. Fashion wasn't just about looking beautiful. It was about making everyone feel beautiful. Her clothes might not sparkle or float or change colors, but they would fit perfectly and feel wonderful on anyone who wore them. That had to count for something. In a galaxy full of different species, all looking for clothes that made them feel good about themselves. At least, Sandra hoped it would. The next evening arrived faster than Sandra wanted. She stood backstage at the grand runway, watching through a small gap in the curtain as thousands of aliens filled the massive circular theater. The audience looked like a living rainbow of different species, all chattering in languages she didn't understand. 5 minutes until showtime, announced a robotic voice over the intercom. Sandra's model stood ready beside her. She had managed to find 6 volunteers from different species willing to wear her universal wear collection. There was Ben, a tall human from the Mars colonies. Maya, a blue-skinned Zentari with elegant features. Kai, a furry wolven with 4 arms. Lisa, a short but sturdy rockborn whose skin looked like polished stone. Alex, a graceful sylph who seemed to float rather than walk. And Emma, a young Aquarian whose translucent skin shimmered like water. Each model wore one of Sandra's adaptive garments. The clothes had transformed to fit their unique bodies perfectly. Ben's jacket adjusted to his broad shoulders. Maya's dress extended to accommodate her extra-long limbs. Kai's shirt created sleeves for all 4 of his arms. The fabric had even changed texture to suit each species' preferences. "You all look amazing," Sandra whispered to her models. "Remember, just walk naturally. Let the clothes do the work." Through the curtain gap, she could see the 3 supermodels sitting in the front row. Zara and Luna's crystal forms caught the stage lights, creating dancing rainbows across the ceiling. Stella had taken the shape of a tall, elegant humanoid, with silver skin that seemed to flow like liquid metal. They were surrounded by fashion critics, journalists, and buyers from across the galaxy. The lights dimmed, and Sandra's heart pounded as the announcer's voice echoed through the theater. "Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of all species, presenting Sandra Martinez and her universal wear collection." The curtain rose and Sandra pushed Ben onto the runway. He walked confidently down the long catwalk, his adaptive jacket shimmering, slightly as it maintained its perfect fit. The audience murmured with interest as the jacket's fabric demonstrated its flexibility. But something was wrong. As Ben reached the center of the runway, the lights around him began to shift strangely. Instead of highlighting his outfit, they made the adaptive fabric look dull and lifeless. The sophisticated gray material suddenly appeared cheap and poorly made. In the front row, Zara raised one crystal hand slightly and beams of light shot from her fingertips. To most of the audience, it looked like she was simply admiring the show. But Sandra could see what was really happening. Zara was manipulating the light hitting Ben's jacket, making it look faded and ugly. Ben stumbled slightly, confused by the unexpected lighting effects. The audience began to whisper, and Sandra heard several negative comments in Galactic Standard, the common language of trade and diplomacy. Maya walked onto the runway next, her adaptive dress flowing beautifully around her tall blue form, but Luna immediately joined her sister's sabotage. Light beams from both twins converged on Maya's dress, creating harsh shadows that made the fabric appear to have holes and tears that weren't really there. Maya tried to continue her walk, but the false shadows made her trip. She caught herself before falling, but the elegant flow of her movement was broken. The dress, which had been perfectly adapted to her species' graceful nature, now looked awkward and ill-fitting under the manipulated lighting. "What's happening?" Maya whispered as she passed Sandra backstage. "I don't know," Sandra lied, not wanting to panic her models, but she had figured out what the Crystal Twins were doing. Their species could control light and photons, a natural ability that made them perfect models. Now they were using that same power to destroy her show. Kai walked onto the runway wearing Sandra's four-sleeved shirt. The garment had adapted perfectly to his multiple arms, something no other designer had managed to do successfully. But as soon as he stepped into the lights, Stella began her own form of sabotage. The shape-shifting model stood up in the front row and began to mimic Kai's appearance. But instead of copying him exactly, Stella exaggerated his features, making him look clumsy and primitive. Her version of Kai stumbled around dramatically, mocking his natural wolven gait. The audience laughed, thinking it was part of the show. They didn't realize Stella was insulting both Kai and Sandra's design. Kai saw Stella's performance and his confidence crumbled. He hurried through his walk and practically ran off the runway. "This isn't right," Lisa said as she prepared for her turn. "Something's wrong with the lights." Sandra wanted to stop the show, but she had worked too hard to get this opportunity. "Just do your best," she told Lisa. "The clothes are working perfectly. Don't let the lighting distract you." But as soon as Lisa stepped onto the runway, the sabotage intensified. Zara and Luna combined their light manipulation to make Lisa's adaptive outfit appear to be the wrong size entirely. The perfectly fitted dress looked huge and baggy under their false projections. Stella continued her cruel mimicry, this time copying Lisa but making her appear to stumble and fall repeatedly. The audience's laughter grew louder. Fashion critics began typing notes into their electronic tablets, their expressions showing clear disapproval. Several important buyers stood up and left their seats, having seen enough. Alex and Emma, the final two models, looked terrified as they watched their predecessors return backstage looking humiliated and confused. "I can't go out." "There," Emma whispered, her translucent skin flickering with stress patterns. "They're making us look like fools." "The clothes aren't the problem," Alex said quietly. "Someone's sabotaging the show." Sandra felt her world collapsing around her. Years of work, her entire life savings, her dreams of proving human creativity could compete in the galactic market. All of it was being destroyed by three cruel supermodels who viewed humans as inferior. In the front row, the three supermodels exchanged glances and smiled. They began speaking to each other in the ancient Vexani language, assuming no human present would understand their words. "The primitive flesh thinks her simple fabrics can compete with true artistry," Zara said, her voice like crystal chimes. "Humans are such an evolutionary dead end," Luna replied. "Their creativity is limited by their simple biology." "We should finish this quickly," Stella added, her form rippling with amusement. "The other species need to see what happens when inferior beings try to rise above their station." But their conversation was being overheard. In the maintenance, Corridor beneath the runway. Someone was listening through the air vents. Jake Rivers, dressed in the simple gray uniform of a station janitor, pressed his ear closer to the ventilation grate. His expression was calm, but his eyes were cold with anger. Jake had been watching the entire show, and he understood exactly what was happening. He also understood every word the three supermodels had spoken. His knowledge of alien languages was far beyond what anyone would expect from a simple maintenance worker. On stage, Sandra made a desperate decision. She walked onto the runway herself, still wearing her plain work clothes. The audience fell silent, unsure what was happening. "My universal wear collection uses adaptive technology," Sandra said, her voice shaking but determined. "These clothes fit perfectly regardless of species, size, or shape. They represent unity and diversity, something I thought this galaxy valued." The three supermodels laughed openly now, not bothering to hide their contempt. Zara and Luna intensified their light manipulation, making Sandra herself appear washed out and pale under the false projections. "Pathetic," Stella said loudly enough for nearby audience members to hear. "Humans always make excuses when their primitive attempts at art fail." Sandra's face burned with shame and anger, but she held her ground. "Fashion should be for everyone, not just those born with special abilities." The audience began to murmur, with discomfort. Some were enjoying the spectacle, but others seemed disturbed by the obvious cruelty being displayed. In the maintenance corridor, Jake Rivers stood up and began moving through the service tunnels with surprising speed and purpose. His simple janitor's uniform hid muscles trained for much more than cleaning floors, and his eyes held intelligence that spoke of advanced education and experience. Sandra's show was being destroyed, but she didn't know that help was already on the way. Jake had seen enough, and he was about to remind the galaxy that humans should never be underestimated. Jake Rivers moved through the maintenance tunnels beneath Catwalk Prime with the quiet grace of a predator. His janitor uniform was dusty and worn, but his movements were those of someone trained in combat and stealth. He had spent 3 years working as a cleaner on the station, and in that time, he had mapped every corridor, every vent, and every access point. Most people saw Jake as just another human worker, invisible and unimportant. The aliens barely noticed him when he emptied their trash or cleaned their floors. That invisibility was exactly what made him perfect for his real job. Jake wasn't really a janitor. He was a deep cover operative for the Human Protection Initiative, a secret organization that monitored human interests across the galaxy. For decades, humanity had been expanding into space, settling new worlds and joining galactic society. But they had made enemies along the way. Some alien species saw humans as a threat, not because humans were stronger or more advanced, but because they were adaptable. Humans could survive in places other species couldn't. They could learn new technologies quickly and improve on them. Most importantly, humans never gave up, even when facing impossible odds. Jake's mission was to watch for threats against human civilians and report back to his handlers. He wasn't supposed to interfere directly, but watching Sandra's show being destroyed by those 3 cruel supermodels had pushed him past his limits. He reached a computer terminal hidden behind a false wall panel. His fingers flew over the keyboard as he accessed the station's central database. To anyone watching, it would look like he was checking maintenance schedules. In reality, he was digging deep into the personal files of Zara, Luna, and Stella. What he found made his jaw clench with anger. Sandra wasn't the first human they had targeted. Over the past 5 years, the 3 supermodels had systematically destroyed the careers of 17 human artists and designers. They used their fame and influence to ensure humans never gained a foothold in the galactic fashion industry. Jake read through file after file. Maria Santos, a human jewelry designer, had been ruined when Stella publicly claimed her work was primitive trinkets. The bad publicity had cost Maria all her clients. Tom Wilson, a fabric artist, had his show sabotaged in exactly the same way Sandra's was being destroyed tonight. Susan Lee, a fashion photographer, had been blacklisted after refusing to digitally alter photos to make human models look less attractive. The pattern was clear and deliberate. These weren't random acts of cruelty. This was organized suppression. Jake dug deeper into the files and found something even more disturbing. The three supermodels were part of a larger network called the Aesthetic Council. This secret group included influential beings from a dozen different species, all united by one goal: keeping humans from achieving success in creative fields. The council believed that human creativity was dangerous. Humans had a way of taking existing ideas and improving them in unexpected ways. They were afraid that if humans gained influence in art, fashion, and entertainment, they would eventually dominate these fields entirely. Jake copied all the files to a secure drive and began planning his next move. He could report this to his superiors, but that would take time. Sandra's career would be destroyed tonight, and she would join the long list of humans who had been crushed by this conspiracy. He made a decision that went against all his training. He was going to help Sandra directly. Jake left the maintenance area and made his way to the fashion district. The grand runway show was still in progress, but he could see through the transparent walls that Sandra's presentation had been a disaster. She stood alone on the stage, her face red with humiliation as the audience laughed and jeered. The three supermodels were still in their front row seats, basking in their success. They had no idea they were being watched by someone who understood exactly what they had done. Jake found Sandra's workspace and slipped inside. Her remaining clothes hung on their racks, looking plain and ordinary compared to the exotic fashions around them. But Jake could see the genius in their simplicity. The adaptive fabric was a breakthrough that could revolutionize clothing for every species in the galaxy. He examined one of Sandra's jackets closely, running the fabric through his fingers. His training had included courses in alien technology and materials science. He could see how the microsensors worked, how they read biological data and adjusted the fabric accordingly. It was brilliant engineering disguised as simple clothing. Jake pulled out a small device that looked like a standard maintenance scanner. In reality, it was a sophisticated computer that could analyze and modify electronic systems. He began examining the programming that controlled Sandra's adaptive fabric. The sabotage had been subtle but effective. The three supermodels had used their natural abilities to make Sandra's clothes look bad, but Jake suspected there was more to it. He ran deep scans on several garments and found what he was looking for. Someone had planted tiny interference devices in Sandra's fabric. The devices were almost invisible, designed to disrupt the adaptive programming when activated by specific light frequencies. Zara and Luna's light manipulation hadn't just made the clothes look bad, it had actually caused the adaptive systems to malfunction. Jake carefully removed the interference devices from each garment. Whoever had planted them was skilled, but not skilled enough to hide their work from someone with Jake's training. The devices were Vexani technology, confirming that the Crystal Twins were behind the sabotage. As he worked, Jake heard footsteps approaching. He quickly hid behind a clothing rack as three figures entered Sandra's workspace. It was Zara, Luna, and Stella, still glowing with their success. "The human show was even more pathetic than we expected," Zara said, her crystal voice tinkling with laughter. "Did you see her face when the audience started laughing?" Luna added. "I almost felt sorry for her. Almost." Stella flowed around the workspace, examining Sandra's remaining clothes with obvious disdain. "These primitive garments are an insult to fashion itself. How did she even get permission to show here?" "Someone in the planning committee must have felt sorry for her," Zara replied. "Humans are always playing on others' sympathy. They're too weak to succeed on their own merit." Jake remained perfectly still, listening to every word. His training had taught him patience, and he knew when to wait and when to act. "We should make sure she never tries this again," Stella said, her form rippling with malice. "Perhaps we should arrange for her workspace to have an accident. A small fire, maybe. Nothing dangerous, just enough to destroy her remaining clothes." "Excellent idea," Luna agreed. "By tomorrow, Sandra Martinez will be on a transport ship back to whatever backwater colony she came from." The three supermodels laughed together as they left the workspace, already planning their next act of cruelty. Jake waited until they were gone, then stepped out from behind the clothing rack. His expression was calm, but his eyes burned with cold determination. He had heard enough to confirm his worst suspicions. These beings weren't just cruel, they were systematic in their campaign against human creativity. But they had made one critical mistake. They had revealed their plans to someone who had the skills and resources to stop them. Jake returned to his computer terminal and began sending encrypted messages to contacts across the galaxy. He wasn't just a janitor or even just a spy. He was part of a network of humans who had been quietly building their own power base in galactic society. They worked in maintenance, security, communications, and dozens of other support roles that made the galaxy function. Most aliens never noticed the humans who kept their world running. That oversight was about to become their weakness. Jake finished sending his messages and looked at his watch. Sandra's show had ended, and she would be returning to her workspace soon. He had work to do before she arrived. It was time to show the galaxy what happened when you tried to destroy human dreams. Jake sat in his small quarters deep in the service levels of Catwalk Prime, surrounded by 3 floating screens showing data streams from across the galaxy. To anyone passing by, his room looked like a simple janitor's quarters with a bed, a small table, and basic furniture. But hidden behind false walls were communication systems that could reach every human settlement in known space. The responses to his messages had been coming in for the past 6 hours. What Jake discovered made the situation far worse than he had imagined. On New Terra, a human sculptor named Peter Kim had been found beaten and left for dead after his art exhibition received praise from several alien critics. The attackers were never caught, but witnesses described seeing crystalline figures fleeing the scene. On Harmony Station, a human fashion designer named Rachel Green had committed suicide after her entire collection was stolen the night before her biggest show. Security footage had mysteriously malfunctioned during the theft, but Jake's contacts had recovered deleted files showing Stella entering and leaving the design studio. On Europa Base, twin human musicians named Carlos and Miguel Rodriguez had been arrested on false charges of copyright theft just days before signing a major recording contract. The charges were later dropped, but their careers were destroyed. The prosecution's evidence had been provided by an anonymous source later traced to Luna's personal assistant. The pattern stretched back almost a decade and covered dozens of human colonies. Wherever humans began to gain recognition in creative fields, tragedy followed. Artists died in accidents, designers had their work stolen, musicians faced false criminal charges, writers discovered their manuscripts had been plagiarized by alien authors. Jake's network had been tracking these incidents for years, but they had never connected them before. The attacks seemed random, scattered across too much space and time to be organized. Now Jake could see the truth. The Aesthetic Council had been conducting a slow, careful campaign of terror against human creativity. But there was something else in the reports that made Jake's blood run cold. The attacks were accelerating. In the past year alone, 15 human artists had been targeted. 3 had died. The others had either fled back to Earth or abandoned their artistic careers entirely. Jake pulled up a star map showing the locations of all the attacks. They formed a clear pattern, spreading outward from the galactic core toward human space. The Aesthetic Council wasn't just suppressing human creativity, they were systematically clearing the way for something bigger. A soft chime indicated an incoming message from his handler, Commander Sarah Miller. Jake activated the secure channel, and Sarah's face appeared on one of his screens. She was a stern woman in her 50s with gray hair and the kind of eyes that missed nothing. "Jake, we've received your reports," Sarah said without preamble. "The situation is worse than we thought. We have intelligence suggesting the Aesthetic Council is planning something they call the final exhibition." Jake leaned forward. "What kind of exhibition?" "We're not sure, but it's scheduled to happen during the grand finale of this fashion week. Every major alien media outlet in the galaxy will be broadcasting it. We think they're planning to make some kind of statement about human inferiority. Using Sandra's show as an example? Possibly. Or they might be planning something more dramatic. Jake, I need you to abort your current mission and extract immediately. This is bigger than one human designer. Jake looked at the screens showing Sandra's destroyed dreams and the faces of 17 other human artists who had been crushed by the same conspiracy. "No, Commander. I'm staying." "That's an order, Jake." "With respect, Commander, Sandra Martinez deserves better than to be sacrificed for the greater good." So did Peter Kim and Rachel Green and all the others. "If we keep running every time they push us, they'll never stop pushing." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "Jake, you're one of our best operatives. We can't afford to lose you on a revenge mission." "It's not revenge," Jake said quietly. "It's justice, and it's also strategy. The Aesthetic Council has been winning because they think humans are weak and isolated. They need to learn that we're neither." Jake cut the connection before Sarah could respond. He knew he would face consequences for disobeying orders, but some things were more important than following protocol. He turned to his computer and began accessing deeper levels of the station's security system. His maintenance worker credentials gave him legitimate access to most areas, but what he was planning would require more than legitimate access. The grand finale show was tomorrow night. If the Aesthetic Council was planning something big, they would need to prepare. Jake began monitoring their communications, tracking their movements, and mapping their resources. What he found confirmed his worst fears. The 3 supermodels weren't working alone. They had allies throughout the station, security guards who looked the other way, technicians who sabotaged human equipment, and administrators who ensured humans got the worst assignments and smallest spaces. Jake discovered that Sandra's workspace assignment hadn't been random. She had been deliberately placed in the most remote location, with the oldest equipment and the worst lighting. Her show had been scheduled for the least popular time slot. Even her transport arrangements had been sabotaged. Her luggage containing backup designs had been accidentally sent to the wrong destination. The conspiracy reached into every level of Catwalk Prime's operation. Humans weren't just unwelcome here. They were being systematically set up for failure. But Jake also found something the conspirators hadn't expected. Humans had been working on Catwalk Prime for years, and they had built their own quiet network. Maintenance workers like Jake, security guards who worked the night shifts, food service workers who prepared meals for the wealthy alien elite, communications technicians who maintained the station's data systems. Most of these humans didn't know about each other, but Jake did. His job had been to identify and monitor human assets throughout the station. Now he began reaching out to them, carefully and quietly. Danny Kim worked in the main computer center. He had access to all the station's primary systems. Lisa Chen was a security guard who monitored the service corridors. She could move anywhere without being questioned. Mike Torres maintained the life support systems and knew every hidden passage in the station. One by one, Jake contacted them with coded messages that looked like routine maintenance requests. He couldn't tell them everything. Operational security was still important, but he could prepare them for what was coming. Jake also began preparing Sandra herself, though she didn't know it yet. He had been monitoring her workspace and had seen her despair after the disastrous show. She was packing her things, ready to give up and return home. He couldn't let that happen. Sandra's universal wear technology was genuinely revolutionary. More importantly, she represented something the galaxy needed to see: human creativity that couldn't be suppressed or destroyed. Jake began modifying Sandra's remaining clothes, removing the hidden interference devices, and upgrading the adaptive systems with improvements of his own design. His training had included advanced material science, and he had access to technologies that weren't available to civilian designers. He also began preparing countermeasures for the supermodel's abilities. Zara and Luna's light manipulation could be disrupted with carefully tuned electromagnetic fields. Stella's shapeshifting had limitations that could be exploited with the right approach. But most importantly, Jake was preparing to reveal the truth about the Aesthetic Council to the galaxy. He had been gathering evidence for years, and now he had enough to expose their conspiracy. The grand finale show would indeed be memorable, but not in the way the council expected. As Jake worked through the night, he thought about all the human artists who had been destroyed by this conspiracy. Peter Kim, Rachel Green, Maria Santos, Tom Wilson, Susan Lee, and so many others. They had trusted the galaxy to judge their work fairly, and they had been betrayed. Tomorrow night, that betrayal would be answered. The galaxy was about to learn that humans didn't just create beautiful things, they also protected what they created, and they never forgot those who tried to destroy their dreams. Jake smiled grimly as he put the finishing touches on his preparations. The Aesthetic Council thought they were dealing with a simple human designer and her primitive clothing. They were about to discover they had picked a fight with something much more dangerous: human determination backed by human ingenuity. The grand finale was going to be very interesting indeed. Sandra sat on her small bed in the cheap quarters she had rented for Fashion Week, staring at her single remaining suitcase. Most of her universal wear collection was ruined, and her transport ticket back to the outer colonies was already purchased. In 12 hours she would leave Catwalk Prime forever. A soft knock at her door made her look up. She wasn't expecting visitors. When she opened the door, she found the same janitor she had seen cleaning near her workspace. He was a human man about her age, with kind eyes and calloused hands. "Ms. Martinez? My name is Jake Rivers. I work maintenance, here on the station. May I come in? I have something important to tell you." Sandra stepped aside, confused but curious. Jake entered and looked around carefully before activating a small device that emitted a low humming sound. "Signal blocker," he explained, seeing her puzzled expression. "We need privacy for this conversation." "I don't understand. What could a maintenance worker want with me?" Jake sat down across from her, his casual demeanor suddenly more serious. "I'm not really a janitor, Sandra. I work for an organization that protects human interests in space, and you've been targeted by something much bigger than simple cruelty." For the next hour, Jake explained everything: the Aesthetic Council, the systematic campaign against human artists, the interference devices that had been planted in her clothes, the wider conspiracy that had been destroying human creativity across the galaxy. Sandra listened with growing horror and anger. "You're telling me that my entire career was sabotaged by aliens who think humans are inferior?" "Yes, but more than that, you're telling me you're some kind of secret agent?" Sandra's voice rose with disbelief. "I know it sounds impossible," Jake said calmly. "But tomorrow night is the grand finale show. The council is planning something they call their final exhibition. I think they want to use that show to make a statement about human weakness to the entire galaxy." "Then they've already won," Sandra said bitterly. "My collection is destroyed. My reputation is ruined. I'm leaving tomorrow morning." "Not if we stop them first." Jake opened his maintenance bag and pulled out several items that Sandra had never seen before. Small electronic devices, modified tools, and what looked like fabric samples that seemed to shift and change color as she watched. "Your universal wear technology is brilliant," Jake said. "But with a few modifications we can make it even better. Good enough to expose the council's sabotage and show the galaxy what human creativity really looks like." Sandra picked up one of the fabric samples. It felt warm and almost alive under her fingers. "What is this?" "Advanced adaptive material. My organization has been developing it for years, based on technology we've learned from various alien species. Think of it as Universal Wear 2.0. Jake spread the fabric samples on Sandra's small table. "This material doesn't just adapt to the wearer's body. It can adapt to environmental conditions, electromagnetic interference, even hostile attempts to manipulate it. The interference devices they planted in your original clothes won't work on this. But I don't have models anymore," Sandra said. "After last night's disaster, none of them want to work with me again. We'll find new models. I have friends on this station, humans who have been waiting for a chance to show what we're really capable of." Over the next few hours, Jake introduced Sandra to his network. Danny Kim, the computer technician, arrived first. He was young and energetic, with quick hands and a brilliant smile. "I've been monitoring the council's communications," Danny said, pulling out a tablet. "They're definitely planning something big for tomorrow night. I've seen message fragments mentioning final demonstration and permanent solution." Lisa Chen, the security guard, came next. She was small but moved with the confidence of someone trained in combat. I've been tracking their movements. They've been meeting in secret locations around the station, always in areas where humans aren't normally allowed. Mike Torres, the life support technician, brought technical specifications for the Grand Runway's systems. I maintain the environmental controls for the main theater, he said. If you need to counteract their light manipulation or shape-shifting tricks, I can help with that. More humans arrived throughout the evening, food service workers who had overheard conversations, communications operators who had monitored suspicious transmissions, transport coordinators who had tracked unusual cargo shipments. Sandra was amazed to discover how many humans worked on Catwalk Prime, and how they had all been quietly watching and waiting for someone to take action against the discrimination they faced daily. We've all seen what they do to us, said Amy Rodriguez, who worked in station administration. They give us the worst jobs, the lowest pay, the least respect, but they need us to keep this place running, so they tolerate our presence. Until now, Jake said grimly. The council wants to prove that humans have no place in galactic culture. If they succeed tomorrow night, it won't just affect artists and designers. It will affect every human trying to make a life in space. Working through the night, the group transformed Sandra's remaining designs using Jake's advanced materials. The new universal wear was unlike anything Sandra had ever created. The fabric could change not just its fit and texture, but its entire appearance. It could become armor against hostile environments or flow like water in zero gravity. It could even generate its own light to counter the Crystal Twins' manipulations. It's incredible, Sandra breathed, watching a jacket transform from simple gray cloth into a shimmering rainbow-colored garment that seemed to glow from within. How is this possible? Humans are good at learning, Jake said with a slight smile. We've been studying alien technology for decades, taking the best parts and improving on them. The council thinks we're primitive, but they've never bothered to see what we can really do when we work together. By morning, they had created an entirely new collection, 6 outfits that showcased not just human creativity, but human technological achievement. And they had 6 volunteers ready to model them. Jake would wear the adaptive suit designed for extreme environments. Danny had the jacket that could interface with computer systems. Lisa wore the dress that could harden into protective armor. Mike had the shirt that could regulate temperature and air quality. Amy wore the skirt that could change its appearance to match any cultural style. And Sandra herself would wear the masterpiece, a complete outfit that combined all the adaptive technologies into one perfect garment. Remember, Jake told the group as they prepared for the evening show, we're not just modeling clothes tonight. We're showing the galaxy that humans won't be suppressed or intimidated. We're proving that creativity and determination are more powerful than natural abilities or inherited advantages. Sandra looked at her team of volunteers, maintenance workers, security guards, and technicians who had transformed themselves into models for her revolutionary collection. Are you sure about this? If we fail, the council will make sure we all suffer for it. We're already suffering, Lisa said quietly. At least this way, we're fighting back. Jake checked his equipment one final time. Hidden in his maintenance gear were devices that would record everything that happened during the show. Whatever the council was planning, the galaxy would see the truth. It's time, he said. Let's show them what humans can really do. As they prepared to leave for the Grand Runway, Sandra felt something she hadn't experienced since arriving at Catwalk Prime. Hope. Not just for her own career, but for every human who had ever been told they weren't good enough, smart enough, or creative enough to succeed among the stars. Tonight, the galaxy would learn that humans didn't just survive. In space, they thrived, they innovated, and they never gave up on their dreams. The grand finale show was the biggest event of Fashion Week. Every seat in the massive theater was filled with the most important beings in galactic society. Media crews from 100 different worlds focused their cameras on the runway, ready to broadcast to billions of viewers across space. Sandra stood backstage with her team of human models, all wearing the upgraded Universal Wear collection. The clothes looked simple and elegant, hiding their advanced capabilities beneath classic designs. Jake had taught them to reveal the technology gradually, building to a dramatic climax that would expose the council's conspiracy. In the front row, Zara, Luna, and Stella sat in their places of honor. The crystal twins sparkled with confident light, while Stella had taken the form of a tall, elegant being with flowing silver features. They had no idea that their victims had spent the night preparing for war. "Remember the plan?" Jake whispered to the group. "Start simple. Let them begin their sabotage, then show them what human technology can really do." The announcer's voice echoed through the theater. "Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of all species, presenting the grand finale collection by Sandra Martinez. Universal Wear, Enhanced Edition." Jake walked onto the runway first, wearing what appeared to be a simple gray business suit. The audience murmured politely, but without much interest. Many had heard about Sandra's disaster from the previous night and expected another failure. In the front row, Zara raised her hand and began manipulating the light hitting Jake's suit, trying to make it look cheap and poorly fitted. But instead of dimming, the fabric began to glow with its own inner light. The suit's adaptive systems detected the hostile interference and responded by generating a brilliant display that made Jake look like he was wearing liquid starlight. The audience gasped in surprise. Zara frowned and increased her light manipulation, but the suit only grew brighter and more beautiful. The advanced fabric was feeding off her energy and using it to enhance its own appearance. Luna joined her sister's efforts, but the combined light from both twins only made Jake's suit more spectacular. As he walked down the runway, the fabric shifted through every color of the spectrum, creating patterns that were impossible to achieve with normal clothing. Danny appeared next, wearing a jacket that looked ordinary until the spotlights hit it. The fabric suddenly came alive with flowing data patterns, displaying star charts, mathematical equations, and alien text that scrolled across the surface like living information. When Stella tried to mock his appearance by shape-shifting into a cruel caricature, the jacket responded by projecting a perfect hologram of Danny that walked alongside the real model, making Stella's distortion look clumsy and obvious. The audience was beginning to pay serious attention now. These weren't the simple adaptive clothes they had expected. This was technology that rivaled anything the most advanced species had created. Lisa walked onto the runway wearing a dress that flowed like water around her body. When Luna tried to create false shadows to make the dress look torn and damaged, the fabric hardened into a mirror-like surface that reflected the light back at the crystal twins. The reflection was so bright that both Zara and Luna had to shield, their eyes breaking their concentration and ending their sabotage attempt. Mike followed, wearing a shirt that seemed to control the very air around him. As he walked, small clouds formed and dissolved around his body, creating a dramatic effect that made him appear to be walking through a gentle storm. When Stella tried to disrupt his movement by projecting false obstacles in his path, the shirt's environmental controls created gusts of wind that blew her shape-shifting form apart, forcing her to resume her true appearance. Amy took the runway wearing a skirt that continuously changed its style and color, adapting to match the cultural fashion preferences of different species in the audience. Crix beings saw armor-like panels. Centauri saw flowing organic curves. Humans saw classic elegance. Each viewer saw something beautiful that spoke to their own aesthetic sense. The three supermodels were becoming desperate. Their sabotage attempts were not only failing but making the human models look even more impressive. Zara and Luna began combining their powers, creating intense beams of light that should have overwhelmed any fabric. But the universal wear garments absorbed the energy and transformed it into even more spectacular displays. Then Sandra stepped onto the runway. She wore an outfit that combined all the technologies her team had displayed, but with something extra that Jake had helped her add. As she walked, the fabric told a story, the story of every human artist who had been destroyed by the Aesthetic Council's conspiracy. Images appeared on her clothes showing Peter Kim's sculptures, Rachel Green's designs, Maria Santos's jewelry, and the work of dozens of other humans who had been silenced. The names and faces of the destroyed artists flowed across the fabric like a memorial, visible to everyone in the theater and every camera broadcasting across the galaxy. The audience fell silent as they realized what they were seeing. This wasn't just a fashion show, it was an accusation. Stella stood up in the front row, her form rippling with rage. "This is a violation of the sacred art of fashion," she shouted. "Humans have no right to make such claims." Sandra stopped in the center of the runway and looked directly at the three supermodels. "For years you have destroyed human creativity because you feared our potential. You planted interference devices in our clothes. You sabotaged our shows. You ruined our careers and drove some of us to despair." Jake stepped out from backstage, no longer dressed as a maintenance worker. He wore a formal uniform that identified him as a representative of the Human Coalition. In his hands, he carried a datapad containing all the evidence he had gathered. The being known as Stella and the Vexani twins, Zara and Luna, are members of a conspiracy called the Aesthetic Council, Jake announced, his voice carrying clearly through the theater's sound system. "They have systematically targeted human artists across the galaxy for elimination or suppression." Danny activated his jacket's display systems, and holographic evidence appeared above the runway. Financial records showing payments to saboteurs. Communication logs detailing planned attacks. Medical records of artists who had been injured or killed. Security footage of the supermodels committing acts of sabotage. The audience erupted in shocked murmurs as the evidence played out before them. Many had suspected that humans faced discrimination, but few had realized the extent of the organized campaign against them. Zara and Luna tried to flee, but Lisa's dress had been monitoring their biological signatures. At Jake's signal, the dress projected energy fields that disrupted their natural light manipulation abilities. Without their powers, the crystal twins looked ordinary and vulnerable. Stella attempted to shapeshift into different forms to escape, but Mike's environmental controls filled the air around her with a gas that interfered with her cellular transformation abilities. She was trapped in her natural appearance, a pale slug-like being that looked nothing like the beautiful forms she usually wore. Station security, led by humans who had been waiting for this moment, moved in to arrest the three conspirators. As they were led away, the gallery erupted in discussions as beings from across the galaxy tried to process what they had witnessed. Sandra stood in the center of the runway, no longer the nervous designer who had arrived days earlier. She had become a symbol of human determination and the refusal to accept defeat. "This collection represents more than adaptive clothing," she said to the cameras that were broadcasting her words across space. "It represents the refusal to be limited by others' expectations. Every species in this galaxy has something valuable to contribute to our shared culture. Humans ask only for the same chance to create and innovate that we give to others." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Orders for universal wear began flooding in from across the galaxy. More importantly, messages of support arrived from alien artists and designers who had witnessed similar discrimination in their own fields. 6 months later, Sandra opened the first human-run fashion house on Catwalk Prime. Her universal wear had revolutionized clothing across the galaxy, but her real achievement was opening doors for other human creators. Jake returned to his cover identity, but now he led a network of human operatives who worked openly to protect human interests. The Aesthetic Council had been exposed and disbanded, its members facing trial for conspiracy and sabotage. The three supermodels were convicted and sentenced to community service, working to help the artists they had previously destroyed. Zara and Luna used their light manipulation abilities to create stunning displays for human art exhibitions. Stella, stripped of her shape-shifting privileges, worked as an assistant to human designers, learning humility through honest labor. But perhaps, the most important change was in the galaxy's perception of humanity. No longer seen as primitive newcomers, humans were recognized as a species with unique gifts for adaptation and innovation. Art schools across space began recruiting human students. Galleries competed to display human works. Fashion houses sought out human designers. Standing in her new studio, looking out at the stars beyond Catwalk Prime, Sandra remembered the night when her dreams had almost been destroyed. Jake's intervention had saved more than her career. It had opened a